What is a reasonable bedtime for a 17-year-old during the summer? My answer usually surprises people because the truth is it has very little to do with the time on the clock. So what I want to do in this video is share my summer agreements with older teens framework so that by the end you have a step-by-step for creating and establishing a summer schedule that supports your teens' well-being without a summer-long power struggle. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Simona, parent coach for moms of older teens, and I'm here to help you navigate hard conversations and set loving boundaries so that connection grows instead of distance. In this video, we'll use that bedtime question as our way in, and I'll walk you through the full 6-step summer agreement framework. Step 3, I want to let you know, is the key to this working really well for you and your teen, but I want to set it up. So let's dive in with step number 1. Step number 1 is knowing what your North Star is for whatever the topic is. So in this example, the topic is summer break bedtime routine. So what you'll do is you'll ask yourself, when it comes to your teen's sleep schedule this summer, what matters most to you? Is it their well-being, their mental health, teaching responsibility, preparing them for the independence that's coming, or is it something else? Because when you're clear on the North Star, the conversation stops being about the clock and it starts being about something that your teen can actually get behind. And that's where the power struggles start to dissolve. Once you're clear on that North Star, then you can answer the second question, which is this a non-negotiable or a flexible guideline? And for most summer sleep schedule questions, especially for our older teens, it's a flexible guideline, which means it's open for a conversation and an agreement that you build together. And we're going to talk about how in step 3, but it's important to notice the distinction because it impacts the conversation we're going to be having. And you can let me know in the comments or reply to the newsletter if you'd like me to create a video on how to go about setting and communicating those non-negotiables, because that's a different process. All right, here is the step that I promised you. It's going to take me a couple of minutes to set it up, but it's what makes everything else work. So stay with me. Step number 3 is clarity within. This is the step where you're going to get clear with yourself so that when you have this conversation with your older teen, it's going to be empowering for both of you. And it can be an opportunity to build connection as well as support their growing independence. And I'm going to share with you how. Clarity within includes 4 components, and we're going to use the acronym GAIN, G-A-I-N. And let's take this one at a time. The G stands for goal because knowing the goal turns the conversation into an opportunity for modeling decision-making. Plus, it can keep you anchored if the conversation gets emotional. So if we look at the bedtime example, if the goal is well-being, then it's not about making them get to sleep by 11 p.m. It's about protecting their health, their physical health, their mental health, their emotional, energetic health. And knowing that creates more clarity for how you're going to measure whether or not the bedtime you both agree to is working or not. The A in GAIN is knowing how you'll assess if the goal is being reached or not, because without a shared understanding about the indicators, the follow-up conversations can get murky. And that's where power struggles can show up, or the common unhelpful pattern of not following through. So back to the bedtime example, if the goal was well-being, you could think through what you want to communicate. For example, something like, your well-being is really important to me. So we can experiment with your bedtime schedule and you can pick your bedtime. But if I start noticing certain patterns, we'll need to revisit it together. And we're still in step 3, clarity within. So what you can do here is figure out what are those indicators for you. So in this example, it could be things like indicators like persistent irritability, total exhaustion, or not following through on their commitments. The I in GAIN is inner agreement, and this one can be more challenging than it sounds on the surface. The I reminds us that having agreement between our own 2 ears is really important because for many of us, we're forging a new path for how we're raising and launching our older teens. A lot of us were raised with some combination of either raising ourselves and handling what needed to be handled and or a culture that taught us if your kiddo doesn't go to bed by a certain time, then you're a bad parent and they are going to fail at life. So inner agreement is getting really honest with yourself about clearing up those inner polarities or those inner tugs of war so that you are on one page with yourself. And N is for navigate. This is where you're going to think through ahead of time how you'll handle if your teen gets salty or doesn't work with you to come to an agreement. Because if you haven't thought it through beforehand, that's when as parents, we can get reactive instead of responsive. And ultimately, Beyond the bedtime that we're going to be talking about with them, we want to be modeling decision making for them and how to have hard conversations in relationally healthy ways. And in order to do that, especially with a salty teen, it's really helpful when we have that pre-planning, which is what we're doing here in step number 3. Before we dive in with how to have the conversation, I want to let you know that if this or any of these steps feels sticky, you aren't on your own to figure it out. I have a lot of free resources as well as individualized programs to support you so that you can thrive in your parenting and your child can thrive as they step into adulthood feeling supported and resilient. And I want to really normalize that sometimes even seemingly straightforward conversations can go sideways. And that's why we're here to talk about the tools for this season of parenting. You can check out the resource links in the description or join me at our upcoming free workshop, 3 Keys to Set Loving Boundaries in a Fast Changing World without guilt and without power struggles. So let's recap step 3 and then continue with the remainder of the summer agreements framework. Step number 3 is clarity within. And we talked about the goal, we talked about assessing, we talked about inner agreement, and we talked about navigating. The next step is having the conversation with your kiddo. And having the conversation actually starts with a pre-conversation choice. So you can say something like, I'd like to spend 15 minutes talking about sleep with you. Is now a good time, or would you prefer to talk at, and then you'll fill in a time that works for you or a date that works for you. When you do have the conversation, aim to keep it 15 minutes or less and be really specific. This is where you bring in the G and the A that you mapped out for yourself in step 3 so that you can have a conversation that builds trust instead of walls. So leaning into the summer break bedtime example, you could say something along these lines. Now, this is what's true for me. You'll find the words that feel right for you. Something like this. What's on my mind is that I believe sleep hygiene is important for our brains. And at the same time, summer's a great opportunity for you to experiment with what worked best for your body. So rather than me define the bedtime and then us having to have conversations on repeat about the clock, I'd like to share with you why I value sleep and then figure out a summer agreement together. Does that work for you? And then what you'll do is you'll wait for them to engage. You'll ask the question and then listen. After you've listened to what they have to say, from there, you can be ready to share where you're coming from. For example, you could say something like, where I'm coming from is that there's enough research out there that points to sleep routines being important for physical and mental health and for overall well-being. And from everything I've read and in my own personal experience, getting enough quality sleep during nighttime hours is ideal. So given that, what do you think would be a reasonable structure that we can agree to? And then you'll listen and have a conversation. And this is where your prep work will really help you to stay grounded and centered in a listening and collaborative mode as they talk and brainstorm. Once you've come to some agreements, you'll want to talk about the indicators of whether it's working or not. And that conversation can look something like this. We humans sometimes have to learn through trial and error, so you might not get it right every time. But if I start seeing that you're regularly moody or irritable or you're starting to miss commitments, then we're going to have to revisit this, because if your sleep schedule isn't protecting your health and well-being, then I'm going to need to step in and be more involved in your schedule. And then you'll listen and you'll have a conversation. And what you're going to want to do after that is land the agreement so that you're both coming away with the same understanding, which is why step number 5 is land the agreement. It's a relatively quick step, but it's its own step because it is so easy to walk away from that conversation and think that you're on the same page but have different understandings. Step 5 can be as simple as wrapping up the conversation with a recap. So something like, what I'm hearing us agree to is that you're going to, and then you'll repeat back your understanding. And then simply ask, are we on the same page? The gift of having a summer agreement is that you and your older teen won't have to have those looping conversations about bedtime routines. However, if you start to notice consistent indicators that their sleep schedule isn't working for them, that's when the follow-up conversation needs to happen. Because if we don't follow through, then we're conditioning them to break their own agreements, and that's not helpful for current them, and it's not helpful for future them. So if we have to have a follow-up conversation, it can be helpful to remember that we're modeling decision-making, we're modeling healthy communication, we're modeling habit building, and even for adults, those aren't easy skills to master on the first try. What can be really helpful, because we're talking about a flexible guideline here, which is a different conversation than if they had broken an agreed upon non-negotiable, because that's a different context. For these flexible guidelines, we want to keep it fact-based, we want to keep it solution-oriented, we want to keep it conversational and collaborative. Leaning into the summer break bedtime example again, you'll want to ask a curious question. It could be something like, I've noticed you've been really dragging for the last 5 days. Is everything okay? And then you'll want to listen. So many of us have the pull to solve, the pull to fix, but listening is really important and empowering at this moment because they might surprise you and they might have already noticed that and they might already have a plan for themselves. That being said, if what they say doesn't sound like they're on top of it, then you could say something along the lines of, here's what I know about developing teenage brains. Right now, your emotional reward system is more fully developed than the part of your brain responsible for long-term planning. So it is my job as your parent to support your well-being and look out for current you as well as for future you. And if you want a neuroscience reference for that particular point, you can check out Robert Sapolsky's book, Behave. And once you put that in the space and you're taking a stand for current them and for future them, then you can have a collaborative conversation to talk about how to course correct. And this is where you're stepping into that mentorship shift that you're going to be needing to make over the next few years because before you know it, their brains are going to be fully developed and they're going to be making their own decisions. So here's where you're laying the groundwork for a healthy adult to adult relationship. And that's the framework for setting up and maintaining summer agreements with your older teen. So let's recap what we just talked about. Step one is to know your North Star. And then you'll determine if it's non-negotiable or if it's flexible. You'll get clarity within using GAIN, Gain, have the conversation, land the agreement, and if it's necessary, have that agreement maintenance conversation. If you like what you've heard, I hope you'll join us at our upcoming free live online workshop, 3 Keys to Set Loving Boundaries in a Fast Changing World without guilt and without power struggles. To register for this workshop, find the link in the description and I will look forward to seeing you there. Until next time, I'm Simona, your parent coach and guide through these older teen years, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye for now.